7:15 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. The USS Carney cut through the glass-like water of the Strait of Hormuz at 12 knots. 200 meters to the port side, the Iranian frigate Alborz held a parallel course. This was not a routine transit. The silence between the two ships was broken by the sudden, sharp crack of a deck gun. The Iranian frigate had fired. One high-explosive round streaked across the bow of the American destroyer. The tracer was a blur of orange light. It passed so close that the bridge crew felt the vibration in the deck plates. The round shattered the morning air and left a trail of white smoke hanging over the water. It was a direct violation of every international maritime law. The question hung in the humid air. Was this an accident, or the first shot of a new war? Inside the Combat Information Center of the Carney, the atmosphere shifted from routine to combat in 3 seconds. The blue glow of the radar screens reflected off the faces of young sailors, who had practiced for this moment 1,000 times. But practice was not reality. Reality was the smell of ozone, and the sound of the general quarters alarm beginning to wail through the ship. The tactical action officer spoke into his headset. His voice was flat, professional. All stations. This is the TAO. We have a hostile act. Status of the Alborz. A sensor operator replied immediately. The Alborz is maintaining course and speed. They are not illuminating us with fire control radar. Their deck gun is returning to the center line. I see no secondary weapon activity. The commanding officer stepped onto the bridge. He did not run. He moved with a calculated calm that settled the room. He looked through the thick bridge windows at the Iranian ship. The Alborz was an old vessel, but its guns were just as lethal as any modern system at this range. Bridge to bridge, the captain said. Get them on the radio now. The communications officer keyed the handset. Iranian warship 7-1. This is United States ship Carney on channel 16. You have fired on a United States Navy vessel in international waters. State your intentions. Over. There was no response. Only the hiss of static filled the bridge. On the deck of the Alborz, the Iranian crew moved with practiced efficiency. Through binoculars, the American lookouts could see the gun crew stepping back from the mount. They did not look at the American destroyer. They did not wave. They acted as if the Carney did not exist. This lack of communication was more threatening than a verbal challenge. It suggested a total lack of fear. The Carney was an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. It was one of the most powerful surface combatants in the world. Its Aegis combat system was capable of tracking hundreds of targets simultaneously. Its vertical launch cells held missiles that could strike targets hundreds of miles away. But at a distance of 200 meters, those long-range weapons were almost useless. This was a knife fight in a dark room. The captain adjusted his cap. He could see the Iranian bridge crew through his glass. They were staring straight ahead, fixed on the horizon. They are baiting us, the captain said quietly to his executive officer. They want a reaction. They want us to illuminate them. They want a reason to claim we escalated. Sir, the sensor operator reported from the deck below. We have multiple high-speed contacts launching from the Iranian coast. Distance 30 nautical miles and closing. Speed 50 knots. Profile matches fast attack craft. The situation was no longer a one-on-one encounter. It was an orchestrated escalation. The single shot had been the signal. Now, the rest of the players were moving into position. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 7:18 in the morning. The bridge of the USS Carney was a cavern of controlled noise. A fine layer of dust had shaken loose from the overhead panels. One of the thick glass panes on the port side had a spiderweb crack running through the center. The round from the Alborz had not hit the ship, but the supersonic wake of the shell had been enough to test the structural integrity of the bridge. The air inside smelled of stale coffee and ozone. The captain stood near the center console. He did not look at the cracked glass. He looked at the digital display. Report damage. The officer of the deck checked his console. The hull is intact. No fire reported. The vibration was a near miss. Impact was approximately 15 meters off the port bow. We are lucky the glass held. If that had been a direct hit, this conversation would be over. The Carney continued its steady pace. To the outside observer, it appeared unbothered. Beneath the skin, the ship was a coiled spring. Damage control teams moved through the passageways in heavy gear. They checked every seal and every bulkhead. In the engine room, the gas turbine technicians monitored the vibration levels. Every man on the ship felt the phantom weight of the round that had just passed them. 7:21 in the morning. The communications officer tried the radio again. His voice was steady, but his knuckles were white as he gripped the handset. Iranian warship 7-1. This is USS Carney. You have committed a hostile act. We are tracking your weapon systems. Cease all provocative maneuvers immediately, or you will be held responsible for the consequences. Over. Again, the Alborz remained silent. The Iranian frigate was so close that the American crew could see the rust streaks on its hull. The Iranian sailors on the deck remained motionless. They were ghosts in green fatigues. This was a psychological game as much as a tactical one. By refusing to speak, the Iranian commander was forcing the Americans to guess his next move. The tactical action officer spoke from the Combat Information Center. Captain, we have a change in the surface picture. The fast attack craft from the coast have increased speed to 60 knots. They are splitting into two groups. They are attempting to bracket us. The captain turned to the display. Distance, 12 nautical miles. Time to intercept is 10 minutes. They are zigzagging. They are not responding to the maritime hailing frequency. The Carney was being boxed in. To the port was the Alborz. To the front and rear were the approaching swarms. The Strait of Hormuz was narrowing. The deep water channel was only a few miles wide. If the Carney stayed on course, it would be surrounded. If it turned, it would be moving toward Iranian territorial waters. 7:25 in the morning. 5 miles away, the lead Iranian fast attack craft bounced over the choppy water. The pilot wore a flight helmet and a dark visor. Behind him, a sailor sat behind a multiple rocket launcher. The tubes were loaded. The safety pins were already pulled. The Iranian pilot did not need a radio to know the plan. He had his orders. They were to push the Americans until the Americans broke. He watched the massive silhouette of the Carney on the horizon. It looked like a mountain of steel. To his eyes, the destroyer was a trespasser. He pushed the throttle forward. The engines roared. Inside the Carney, the tension reached a breaking point. The weapon system operators waited for the word. They had the Iranian boats in their sights. The electronic signatures of the rocket launchers were clearly identified. The Alborz is turning, the lookout shouted. The Iranian frigate was no longer holding a parallel course. It was leaning hard to the starboard. It was cutting across the Carney's bow. It was a game of chicken at 12 knots. 2,000 tons of steel were swinging directly into the path of the American destroyer. The captain of the Carney gripped the edge of the chart table. Left full rudder. Increase speed to 20 knots. Do not let him cross our bow. The destroyer began to heel over. The engine surged. For a moment, the two ships were closing the gap even further. The distance dropped to 100 meters, then 80. The roar of the Alborz's engines was now audible over the wind. A sensor alarm began to chirp. It was a high-pitched, steady tone. The tactical action officer's voice came over the speaker. It was no longer flat. Captain, we have been painted. Fire control radar from the Iranian coast. They have a missile lock on us. 7:27 in the morning. The bridge of the Alborz. The Iranian commander, Captain Rezai, stood at the bridge window. He did not look at the smoke still drifting from his deck gun. He looked at the USS Carney. The American destroyer was heeling over as it increased speed. It was a massive machine of gray steel. From this distance, he could see the individual sailors on the bridge. He could see their focus. The air on the Alborz was thick with the smell of diesel and strong tea. The bridge was quiet. There was no shouting, only the low murmur of his officers reporting sensor data. The Iranian commander turned to his executive officer. The Americans are disciplined. They did not return fire immediately. They are waiting for a reason. The executive officer looked at the radar screen. The coastal batteries at Bandar Abbas have a lock. The Americans know we are watching them from the shore. They are boxed in, Captain. Rezai nodded. He had received his orders 3 hours ago. This was not a rogue action. It was a calibrated test of American resolve. The goal was not to start a war. The goal was to prove that the Strait of Hormuz belonged to those who were willing to bleed for it. Maintain course, Rezai said. Do not respond to their radio calls. Silence is our strongest weapon right now. Let them wonder who is in control. 7:30 in the morning. Bahrain. 150 miles away, the 5th Fleet Command Center was a hive of activity. The room was dark, lit only by the blue and green glow of massive wall displays. The silence of the night shift had been shattered 5 minutes ago. An admiral stood in the center of the room. He stared at a blinking red icon labeled Carney. Next to it, dozens of smaller red triangles represented the Iranian fast attack craft. Report, the admiral said. A young lieutenant spoke quickly. Sir. The Carney reports a shot across the bow from the Alborz. Distance was 200 meters. No damage to the hull, but the bridge windows were rattled. We have confirmed the Carney is being painted by Iranian Silkworm missile batteries on the coast. The Eisenhower strike group is 400 miles away. We are rerouting their air wing now. The admiral leaned over the console. What is the Carney doing? They are maintaining restraint, sir. Captain Miller is holding his fire, but he is being squeezed. The Iranian swarm is less than 10 miles out. If they close to within 2 miles, the Carney will have no choice but to defend itself. Tell Miller we are with him, the admiral said, and get the State Department on the phone. We need a line to Tehran before someone pulls a trigger. 7:32 in the morning. Tehran. Inside a hardened bunker, the IRGC Naval Command watched the same tactical picture. The mood was one of grim satisfaction. They had poked the lion. Now they waited to see if it would bite or back away. They knew the risks. A single mistake by a junior officer on either side could ignite the entire Gulf. Back on the water, the USS Carney was no longer alone. The first of the Iranian fast attack craft appeared on the horizon. They were small, fast, and low to the water. They moved like insects, kicking up white plumes of spray. There were 12 of them. They were not moving in a straight line. They were weaving, a tactic designed to confuse automated targeting systems. Inside the Carney, the sound of the swarm was a low throb that could be felt through the soles of the sailors' boots. The captain of the Carney looked at his tactical action officer. They are inside 5 miles. Clear the 5-inch gun for surface engagement, but do not load the chamber. I want them to see the barrel move. The massive gun on the Carney's bow began to rotate. It tracked the lead Iranian boat with predatory smoothness. A voice came over the internal comms. Captain, the Alborz is signaling. They are using a searchlight. It is Morse code. The bridge grew silent as the lookout watched the flashes of light from the Iranian ship. Message reads, "You are in restricted waters. Turn back or be destroyed." 7:35 in the morning. The Strait of Hormuz. The swarm had arrived. 12 Iranian fast attack craft were now less than 4,000 meters from the USS Carney. They moved in a staggered V formation. Each boat carried a crew of 4 and a multiple rocket launcher system. They were small targets, fast, difficult for large caliber weapons to track. The Alborz held its position. It remained a steady, menacing presence, 200 meters away. The Iranian frigate was the anchor of the formation. It forced the Carney to stay on its current heading. If the American destroyer turned to engage the swarm, it would risk a collision with the Alborz. Inside the Combat Information Center, the tactical action officer watched the display. The red dots of the fast attack craft were closing the gap. Distance 3,000 meters, the officer reported. They are beginning a high-speed encircling maneuver. The captain of the Carney watched the boats through the bridge windows. They were kicking up massive wakes. They looked like predators circling a wounded whale. Bridge to combat, the captain said. Status of the 5-inch gun and the phalanx. 5-inch is locked on the lead boat, the tactical action officer replied. Phalanx systems are in standby. We are ready to engage. Wait, the captain said. This was the crisis of the rules of engagement. Under international law, a ship has the right to defend itself against a hostile act or demonstrated hostile intent. The Alborz had already fired. That was a hostile act. But the Carney had not returned fire. Now, the swarm was demonstrating intent. But at what point does a maneuver become an attack? 7:38 in the morning. The Iranian boats were now inside 2,000 meters. They began to cross the wake of the Carney. They were weaving between the American ship and the Alborz. It was a chaotic, high-speed dance. One mistake by a boat pilot would result in a collision that could trigger a full-scale engagement. The captain of the Carney felt the sweat on the back of his neck. He knew the world was watching. If he fired too early, he was the aggressor. If he waited too long, he could lose his ship. "Captain," the executive officer whispered, "they are loading. I see the crews on the boats. They are preparing the rocket launchers." "Maintain discipline," the captain replied. "Do not fire until I give the command. We are going to show them we are not intimidated." On board the Alborz, Captain Rezai watched the American destroyer. He saw the 5-inch gun barrel following his boats. He saw the phalanx Gatling guns twitching as they tracked the multiple targets. He knew the American captain was under immense pressure. "They are holding," Rezai said to his bridge crew. "The Americans have nerves of steel. Signal the boats. Close to 500 meters. Let us see if their nerves hold when they can see the whites of our eyes." 7:41 in the morning. The lead Iranian boat surged forward. It broke away from the formation and headed directly for the Carney's midsection. It was a suicide run profile. "Vampire! Vampire!" a voice shouted over the internal net. It was the warning for an incoming missile, but it was a false alarm. A sensor ghost caused by the extreme clutter of the swarm. "False contact," the tactical action officer corrected quickly, but the lead boat is inside 1,000 meters. They are not slowing down. The captain of the Carney stepped toward the glass. "Sound the collision alarm. All hands brace for impact." The low, rhythmic honk of the alarm filled the ship. The sailors on the bridge grabbed onto handrails. They watched as the small Iranian boat grew larger and larger in the window. It was a game of chicken that had reached its final seconds. The boat did not hit. At the last possible moment, it veered away, passing so close that the American crew could see the individual bolts on its hull. The captain of the Carney did not exhale. He knew this was only the beginning of the pressure. "Captain," the tactical action officer said, "new contact. Airborne. Coming from the north. High speed. It is not one of ours." The morning was no longer quiet. It was screaming. 7:42 in the morning. The airborne contact was moving at 500 knots. It was hugging the coastline, staying low to avoid long-range detection. On the bridge of the USS Carney, the air felt electric. Every sailor was braced against a console or a bulkhead. "Classification on the air contact," the captain ordered. The tactical action officer responded from the Combat Information Center. "Confirmed. Iranian Su-24 Fencer. It is carrying 2 anti-ship missiles under the wings. It is currently 20 miles out and turning toward our position. It is in a strike profile." The captain of the Carney did not hesitate. "Load the 5-inch gun. Hot, armor-piercing rounds. If that aircraft crosses the 10-mile line, we illuminate it with the Aegis system. Give them every warning we have." Inside the mount of the 5-inch gun, the automated loader hissed. A 70-pound shell slid into the breech with a heavy metallic clack. The weapon was no longer a deterrent. It was a loaded gun pointed at the heart of the Iranian swarm. 7:46 in the morning. High above the Gulf, 2 F-18 Super Hornets from the USS Eisenhower pushed into supersonic speeds. Their call sign was Viper 1-1. The pilots could see the white wakes of the Iranian boats on their infrared sensors. The lead pilot spoke into his radio. "Control. Viper 1-1 is on station. We have eyes on the Carney and the swarm. We are requesting permission to drop to 5,000 feet and perform a show of force. Over." The response from the Carrier Strike Group commander was immediate. "Viper 1-1, you are cleared for a low-altitude pass. Do not cross the Iranian coastline. Do not release ordnance unless the Carney is fired upon. Confirm. Over." Copy. Engaging show of force now. The two American fighters tipped their wings and began a screaming descent. They were moving toward the Alborz, and the swarm at Mach 1.2. The sonic boom would arrive seconds before the aircraft themselves. 7:49 in the morning. On the bridge of the Alborz, Captain Rezai heard the first distant thunder of the approaching jets. He looked up, but the sky was a hazy blue that hid the high-altitude predators. He knew what was coming. The Americans were increasing the stakes. His executive officer looked at him with concern. "Captain, the American fighters are diving. Our radar is being jammed. We cannot maintain a lock on the Carney." Rezai gripped the edge of his seat. "The Su-24 is our cover. Tell the pilot to maintain his run. If the Americans fire a single shot at our boats, he is to launch his missiles. We will not be the only ones to sink today." The Iranian fast attack craft were now in a tight circle around the Carney. They were less than 300 meters from the American hull. The air was filled with the smell of their two-stroke engines. The sailors on the boats were no longer maneuvering. They were sitting still, their hands on the triggers of their rocket launchers. They were waiting for a signal. Inside the Carney, the silence was absolute. The only sound was the hum of the cooling fans for the electronics. The captain looked at the clock. "The fencer is at 12 miles. All stations, stand by for engagement. This is it." The 5-inch gun on the Carney's bow twitched. It was no longer tracking the boats. It had elevated. It was pointed at the horizon where the Iranian jet was about to appear. The situation had reached a state of total commitment. Every weapon was loaded. Every finger was on a trigger. The next sound would not be a radio call. It would be an explosion. 7:50 in the morning. The air above the Strait of Hormuz exploded. Two American Super Hornets screamed across the sky at Mach 1.2. The sonic boom hit the water like a physical blow. It shattered the surface of the sea and rattled the hulls of the Iranian fast attack craft. On the bridge of the USS Carney, the cracked glass of the port window finally gave way. A shower of safety glass fell to the deck. No one moved to clean it. 7:50 and 30 seconds. The Iranian Su-24 fencer crossed the 10-mile line. It was now inside the engagement zone of the Carney's surface-to-air missiles. On the bridge of the destroyer, the fire control computer emitted a continuous, high-pitched tone. The tactical action officer spoke. His voice was a whisper. "We have a steady track. Birds are hot. Target is illuminated." The captain of the Carney stared at the tactical display. "Warning. Last warning. Send it now." The communications officer shouted into the radio. "Iranian aircraft. This is USS Carney. You are standing in a position of immediate danger. Turn away or you will be engaged. I say again, you will be engaged." 7:51 in the morning. The Su-24 did not turn. The pilot stayed low. He was at 500 feet. He was less than 60 seconds from his missile release point. Inside the cockpit of the Iranian jet, the radar warning receiver was screaming. The pilot's hand tightened on the stick. He looked at the countdown on his heads-up display. 40 seconds to launch. 7:51 and 30 seconds. On the deck of the Alborz, the Iranian crew raised their shoulder-fired missiles. They were pointing them at the diving F-18 fighters. The Iranian frigate's own radar was now spinning at maximum speed. It was locked on the Carney's bridge. The distance between the ships was 200 meters. The swarm of fast attack craft had closed to 50 meters. They were so close that the American sailors on the deck could see the facial expressions of the Iranian crews. One Iranian sailor held a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. He was aiming it directly at the Carney's bridge window. 7:52 in the morning. The captain of the Carney placed his hand on the arm of his chair. He looked at the tactical action officer. "If the fencer launches," the captain said, "we fire everything. Clear the decks." "Copy, Captain. We are ready." 7:52 and 20 seconds. The Iranian pilot reached for the launch button. The American jets were banking hard to get on his tail. The Carney's 5-inch gun was centered on his nose. The world was frozen in a single heartbeat. The roar of engines, the scream of alarms, and the pounding of hearts were the only sounds left in the universe. 7:52 and 40 seconds. Everything was ready. The missiles were primed. The guns were loaded. The order was a split second away. 7:53 in the morning. The air did not fill with the sound of missiles. It filled with a low, bone-shaking groan of tearing metal. Less than 2 miles to the east, the Al-Salam Star, a 300,000-ton ultra-large crude carrier, suffered a catastrophic boiler explosion. The massive tanker was transiting the strait under a Liberian flag. The blast was so powerful it was visible on every radar screen. In the area as a sudden, blooming cloud of heat and debris. 7:53 and 30 seconds. The tanker did not sink. Instead, its steering gear jammed hard to the starboard. The 300-meter-long vessel began a slow, unstoppable turn. It was a mountain of steel, moving at 15 knots, and it was drifting directly into the center of the engagement zone. Inside the USS Carney, the tactical action officer shouted over the alarms. "Captain, new contact. The tanker is off course. It is cutting across the fencers, flight path, and our line of fire on the Alborz." 7:54 in the morning. The Iranian Su-24 pilot saw the wall of steel rising in his canopy. The tanker was so tall, it blocked his view of the Carney. He was seconds from impact. He yanked his control stick to the left, pulling a desperate 6G turn that sent his anti-ship missiles screaming toward the empty sky. He missed the tanker's superstructure by less than 50 meters. The Iranian pilot was no longer thinking about combat. He was fighting to keep his aircraft from stalling. 7:54 and 40 seconds. On the bridge of the Alborz, Captain Rezai watched in horror. As the Al-Salam Star loomed over his frigate, the tanker was drifting toward them, its stern wreathed in black, oily smoke. If the Alborz did not move, it would be crushed like an aluminum can. "All engines full astern," Rezai roared. "Break formation. Get us away from that hull." The Iranian frigate reversed its engines, its wake churning into white foam. The professional discipline of the Iranian crew was momentarily replaced by the primal need to survive a collision with a vessel 10 times its size. 7:55 in the morning. The USS Carney was also in the path of the drifting giant. The tanker was now between the American destroyer and the Iranian swarm. The knife fight had been interrupted by a third party that cared nothing for geopolitics. The captain of the Carney seized the moment. "All engines ahead full. Right standard rudder. We are going around the tanker's bow. Use the Al-Salam as a shield." The Carney surged forward. It used the massive bulk of the burning tanker to break line of sight from the Iranian coastal batteries. The missile lock from the shore flickered and then died as the tanker's 300 meters of steel absorbed the radar waves. 7:55 and 30 seconds. The Iranian fast attack craft were scattered. The sudden appearance of the drifting tanker had forced them to break their swarm. Several boats were caught in the massive wake of the Al-Salam Star, tossing them around like toys. The coordination of the attack was gone. The immediate threat of war had been replaced by a massive maritime disaster. The captain of the Carney looked at the burning tanker. He saw orange flames licking at the bridge of the merchant vessel. He saw lifeboats being lowered in a panic. "Captain," the executive officer said, "the Alborz is backing off. They are clear of the collision zone. The Iranian jet is RTB, returning to base." The captain wiped the sweat from his forehead. He looked at the cracked bridge window. The silence that followed was heavy. "They are not the priority anymore," the captain said. "That tanker is carrying 2 million barrels of crude. If it goes up, the whole strait goes with it." He looked at his communications officer. "Radio the Alborz, not on the hailing frequency. Use the bridge to bridge. Tell them we are standing down to assist the tanker. Ask them if they are going to help, or if they are going to watch it burn." The morning had changed. The hunters were now being asked to be rescuers. 7:58 in the morning. The USS Carney slowed its engines as it cleared the bow of the Al-Salam Star. The massive tanker was a wall of black smoke and orange fire. The heat was intense enough to be felt through the Carney's hull. On the bridge, the captain watched the merchant sailors scrambling across the deck of the burning vessel. The geopolitical chess match had been replaced by the raw urgency of a search and rescue operation. TAO. Weapons to standby, the captain ordered. Secure the 5-inch gun. I want the Seahawk helicopter in the air. Now, we have people in the water. The flight deck crew of the Carney moved with practice speed. The rotors of the MH-60 Romeo began to turn, cutting through the thick smoke drifting from the tanker. It was a dangerous launch. The air was turbulent and filled with debris, but the American crew did not hesitate. 8:02 in the morning. The communications officer keyed the radio. His voice was no longer challenging. It was clinical. Iranian warship 7-1. This is USS Carney. We are commencing life-saving operations for the crew of the Al-Salam Star. We are launching one rotary wing aircraft. It will remain within 1 mile of the tanker. Do not interfere. Over. For the first time in 45 minutes, the radio crackled with a human voice from the other side. USS Carney. This is Alborz. We acknowledge your SAR operations. We are also launching a rescue boat. We will maintain a distance of 500 meters from your hull. Do not engage. Over. The tone was stiff, professional. It was the sound of two professionals recognizing a common enemy. The sea, 8:05 in the morning. On the bridge of the Alborz, Captain Rezai watched the American helicopter lift off from the Carney's deck. It disappeared into the black smoke of the tanker. He looked at his own men preparing a rigid-hull inflatable boat. The tension on his bridge had not vanished, but it had transformed. The immediate impulse to kill had been suppressed by the ancient law of the mariner. The Americans are fast, Rezai's executive officer remarked. They had that bird in the air in less than 4 minutes. Rezai nodded slowly. They are disciplined, and they are giving us a way out of this without losing face. If we help the tanker, we are heroes of the Gulf. If we fire now, we are the ones who let 2 million barrels of oil destroy our own coastline. It was a tactical retreat disguised as a humanitarian mission. Rezai knew it. The American captain knew it. The Iranian fast attack craft were already moving toward the stern of the tanker, their crews now reaching for life rings instead of rocket launchers. 8:08 in the morning. The American helicopter hovered over the churning water near the tanker's stern. A rescue swimmer jumped from the cabin, disappearing into the oily waves. Moments later, he resurfaced, holding on to a merchant sailor who had jumped from the burning deck. From the bridge of the Carney, the captain watched the Iranian rescue boat pull another survivor from the water. For a brief moment, the two navies were working the same problem. The weapons were still loaded, the coastal missiles were still aimed, but the electronic locks had been broken. Captain, the tactical action officer reported, the Iranian coastal batteries have gone to standby. The fire control radar is off. We are no longer being painted. The captain leaned against the bridge console. He felt the weight of the last hour pressing down on him. They saw the same thing we did. Nobody wins if this tanker goes up. But don't get comfortable. The Alborz is still a warship, and we are still in their backyard. The fire on the Al-Salam Star continued to roar. The crisis had been diverted by a disaster, but as the two ships worked together, in the shadow of the flames, the silence between them was no longer empty. It was filled with the sound of a temporary, fragile peace. The rescue was just beginning, but the war had been postponed. 8:15 in the morning. The black pillar of smoke from the Al-Salam Star reached 1,000 feet into the sky. It was a somber monument to the morning's chaos. The USS Carney's Seahawk helicopter hovered near the tanker's stern, its winch pulling a final survivor from the oily water. Below, the Iranian rescue boat was already heading back toward the Alborz, with 4 merchant sailors wrapped in blankets. The immediate terror of the explosion had faded into the exhausting work of disaster management. The fire on the tanker was still burning, but the hull was stable. The crude oil had not yet breached the primary tanks. Inside the Combat Information Center of the Carney, the tension had not disappeared. It had simply changed shape. The tactical action officer watched the screens. The Iranian fast attack craft were no longer circling. They were hovering in a loose line 3 miles away. They were waiting for orders. "The air picture is clear," the officer reported. "The Su-24 has landed at Bandar Abbas. Our F-18s are orbiting at 20,000 feet. They are low on fuel. They will need to tank soon." The captain of the Carney nodded. He looked at the electronic display. The Alborz was moving again. It was no longer drifting. It was turning back to its original heading, away from the tanker, and toward the Iranian coast. 8:18 in the morning. The distance between the two warships began to grow. 100 meters became 500. 500 became 1,000. The physical space between them felt like a heavy weight being lifted from the deck of the Carney. The captain picked up the radio handset. This was the final move of the tactical game. Iranian warship 7-1. "This is USS Carney. We have recovered 12 survivors. We are prepared to transfer them to a neutral vessel or a shore facility. We are resuming our transit of the strait. Out." The response from the Alborz was delayed. When it came, it was formal. "USS Carney. This is Alborz. We have recovered 6 survivors. We will transport them to the mainland for medical treatment. You are reminded that you are exiting the search area. Maintain your course. Out." There was no thank you. There was no apology for the shot across the bow. There was only the cold, hard reality of two nations that did not trust each other, momentarily bound by a disaster they both wanted to avoid. 8:21 in the morning. On the bridge of the Alborz, Captain Rezai watched the gray silhouette of the American destroyer grow smaller on the horizon. His deck was covered in soot from the tanker's fire. His crew was exhausted. He knew that in a few hours, he would have to explain to his superiors why he had not followed through with the engagement. He looked at the digital recorder on his console. It held the data of the morning's encounter. It would be analyzed by intelligence officers in Tehran for months. They would look for weaknesses in the American response. They would look for hesitation. "The Americans did not break," Rezai's executive officer said quietly. "No," Rezai replied. "They did not. But they know we are here. They know we can touch them whenever we choose." That was the mission. The tanker was an accident. The shot was a message. 8:25 in the morning. The USS Carney increased speed to 20 knots. The vibrations of the engines felt like a heartbeat returning to normal. The cracked window on the bridge had been covered with a sheet of heavy plastic, which flapped loudly in the wind. The captain stood at the window, looking back at the smoke. On the horizon, he thought about the round that had passed 20 meters from his face. He thought about the young sailor with the rocket launcher. "Captain," the executive officer said, "the admiral is on the secure line. He wants a full report for the Joint Chiefs." "Tell him we are clear of the strait," the captain said. "Tell him the ship is fully mission capable. And tell him that for 3 minutes, this morning, the world was about to change. We got lucky." This time, the Carney moved into the open water of the Gulf of Oman. The sun was high now, turning the sea into a blinding sheet of gold. The Iranian coast was a jagged line of brown mountains in the distance. The immediate crisis was over. But the silence that followed was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a long, cold breath before the next encounter. 3 days later, Washington, District of Columbia. Inside the National Military Command Center, the air was cool and smelled of industrial floor wax. A group of high-ranking officers and civilian analysts gathered around a single high-definition monitor. They were watching the footage from the USS Carney's bridge camera. The video was grainy, shaken by the vibration of the engines, but the orange streak of the Iranian shell was unmistakable. It passed through the frame in less than half a second. A senior analyst pointed to a freeze frame of the Alborz. "The ballistic analysis is complete," he said. "The shot was not a mistake." The Iranian gunner aimed for a point exactly 25 meters ahead of the Carney's bridge. At that range, with an unguided deck gun, that is a display of extreme precision. It was a calculated risk, intended to prove their fire control systems are superior to our expectations. The admiral in the center of the room did not look away from the screen. And the tanker? The boiler explosion on the Al Salam Star was a mechanical failure. Pure coincidence. the analyst replied, but it provided the Iranian commander with a graceful exit. If that tanker had not drifted into the middle of the engagement, we would be looking at a very different set of satellite photos today. One of those ships would be on the bottom. The admiral nodded slowly. The Carney's captain showed remarkable restraint. He held his fire even after being painted by coastal batteries. That is the discipline we pay for. But the Iranians learned something too. They learned exactly how far they can push before our hammers come down. 3 days later, Tehran. In a windowless room draped in maps of the Persian Gulf, Captain Rezai stood before a committee of senior IRGC officers. He was no longer in his sea fatigues. He wore a formal uniform, but his face showed the exhaustion of the long debriefing. On the table before him was a digital tablet showing the same footage the Americans were watching half a world away. The objective was achieved, Rezai said. His voice was steady despite the pressure. We demonstrated that the Americans are vulnerable at close range. We proved that their Aegis system cannot protect them from a determined surface swarm in confined waters. The American captain was forced to accept our presence as a peer. One of the senior officers leaned forward. And the rescue of the merchant sailors? Some in the ministry see that as a sign of weakness. It was a tactical necessity, Rezai countered. By assisting the tanker, we seized the moral high ground. We turned a potential act of war into a demonstration of regional responsibility. The Americans were forced to cooperate with us. In the eyes of the world, we shared control of the strait. The officer grunted, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. The meeting ended in a cold, professional silence. Rezai walked out into the bright afternoon sun of Tehran, feeling the weight of the invisible line he had crossed, and then stepped back over. 10 days later, the North Arabian Sea. The USS Carney moved through the deep blue water, far from the claustrophobic confines of the Hormuz. The cracked bridge window had been replaced. The ship looked as it always did, powerful, gray, and silent. On the bridge, Captain Miller looked out at the horizon. He was holding a cup of coffee, his eyes tracking a distant merchant vessel. Modern warfare was often described in terms of hardware and high-speed data links. But as Miller knew, it was still a game played by human beings. It was decided by the sweat on a pilot's hands and the split-second decisions of commanders who knew that a single error could burn a decade of diplomacy in an instant. No missiles had flown, no ships had been lost, but the encounter between the Carney and the Alborz would be studied in military academies for years. It was a masterclass in the gray zone, where the difference between a warning and a war was measured. In 20 meters of salty air, the strategic assessment was clear. Both sides had looked into the abyss and decided they were not ready to fall. For now, the strait remained open. The tankers continued to flow, but every sailor on the Carney knew the truth. The silence of the Gulf was not peace. It was simply the time between the last shot and the next one. The sun began to set, casting long, golden shadows across the deck of the destroyer. The ocean was calm. The world remained at rest. But in the dark rooms of power in two different capitals, the data was being uploaded, the lessons were being learned, and the next move was already being planned.